everybody left and went home because we were in the Washington, D.C. area, and so we didn't really know what was happening.
On September 11th at 8:46, Flight 11 went into the north face of the North Tower of the World Trade Center, crashing between floors 93 and 99. At 9:03, Flight 175 went into the south face of the South Tower of the Trade Center, crashing between floors 77 and 85. 9:37, Flight 77 struck the western side of the Pentagon. Where were you when 9/11 happened?
We were living in Silver Spring, Maryland, outside of Washington, D.C. I was at work.
When did you hear about the attack? While you were at work, or were you at home?
I was at work because I worked for Discovery Channel, and we had TVs all over the place.
One another, how fast were you able to pick up that it was a terrorist attack and not just some accident?
I think I picked up on it quicker than some people just because I worked for a media company and we saw reports coming in.
19 members of the Islamic extremist group Al-Qaeda hijacked the 4 airplanes that crashed into the building. I feel like stereotypes started to play a huge role.
Yes, and yes.
There was a shift in the United States immigration policies, and there was an uprise of discrimination, racial profiling, and hate crimes.
For sure, people were stereotyping. In my opinion, it was the beginning of people not understanding the difference in Middle Eastern religions and countries and things of that nature, especially having Egyptians in our family.
Do you feel people like Grandpa Victor felt like he was discriminated against? Or?
A little bit. He actually applied to work for the FBI and do Arabic translations, but he didn't get chosen.
Did you know anyone who was a first responder during 9/11?
My father-in-law is a retired Port Authority cop, and he was retired at 9/11. His brother was a New York City firefighter. They happened to be at our house in Maryland on the day of 9/11, but Uncle Donald went back and worked extensively at the site, Ground Zero.
Immediately after 9/11, the World Trade Center site was often referred to as Ground Zero or the Pile. Many first responders and survivors still face mental and physical health issues to this day. It is estimated that 410,000 first responders, cleanup crew members, and survivors spent not only days but weeks breathing in air heavy with toxins of 400 tons of crushed concrete and glass. After 9/11, the stock markets immediately dropped and almost every economic zone was economically negatively impacted. The economy was impacted?
Yes, I think the economy slowed for at least a year or so after 9/11 just because people were fearful.
In what way were they fearful? Like fearful to travel, fearful to
travel, fearful to go out and about. I think people were afraid more attacks could happen, and they wanted to sort of protect themselves and their assets.
9/11 brought Americans together?
Yes, temporarily.
In what ways?
I think both the DC and New York communities really rallied to support people in their communities, and I also think because it was the first attack on American soil, for most people alive at that time, it sort of brought together a need to band together and be prepared for whatever was next.
Do you feel only those areas rallied together, not the whole entire United States?
I think the whole United States did, but living in Washington, D.C. and having Dad being from New Jersey, it felt like those areas were much more intensely bonded than people we know, our family members in Minnesota. And
anxiety remained heightened after 9/11 in regards to terrorist attacks. At least 28 to 35% of people exposed to terrorist attacks may develop PTSD. Who reacted to acts of violence after 9/11?
I think people were a little more anxious that other acts of violence could occur and didn't want to travel or go places for a period of time.
How would you say events such as the DC Sniper impact? The DC Sniper was a shooting spree in the Washington area that killed 10 people and injured 3. It took place over a 3-week period in October of 2002.
The Americans.
Since the DC Sniper was exactly 1 year after 9/11, and we lived in the same place for both, the DC Sniper in many ways was much more anxiety inducing than 9/11. Probably because of 9/11, we were more anxious, but it was so random we didn't really understand what was happening.
Do you think anyone thought it was a terrorist attack?
For sure, I think people thought it was in the beginning.
Following 9/11, 2,996 deaths were reported and thousands injured. The Global War of Terror, an international American-led military campaign launched after the events that occurred on September 11, 2001. Now located where the World Trade Center was in New York City is the 9/11 Memorial Museum. 9/11 remains to be one of the more deadly attacks that ever occurred in the United States.